I'm really delighted now to introduce my good friend, Christopher Norton, who is the host of the Emmy Award-winning program, The American Law Journal. The American Law Journal is coming to WHYY in the fall, so we're really happy that that's happened, and they certainly deserve the attention. They have been an extraordinary program, really bringing to light issues connected with the rule of law and issues in legal practice. So I'm quite delighted. In addition, Christopher is a former New Jersey prosecutor, so he understands these issues very well. And I'm going to let Christopher kick off and introduce our very distinguished panel. Please join me in welcoming Christopher Norton.
Thank you. And thank you, Claire. And I will look at my notes more than Claire did. Trust me, she did nothing but look at all of you the entire time. So she's got it all downloaded. I don't have all of it downloaded. I want to introduce this great panel with us this afternoon. Dr. Tom Farley on the far right is the health commissioner with the city of Philadelphia. Next to him is attorney Don Migliore. He is a plaintiff's counsel with Motley Rice, a national law firm. Jerry Ann DiPiano is a president and CEO with FemPharma. And we thank her for coming here today, the only pharma executive with us on any of these panels today. Steve Scheller has been a familiar face on our television program over the many years, plaintiff's counsel right here in Philadelphia, and Dr. Andrew Kolodny, who's the co-director of opioid policy research at the Heller School for Social Policy and Management in Brandeis at Brandeis University. Let me tell you a very quick story. James Comey, back in January of 2002, is promoted to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And he stands up in front of the young prosecutors and he says to them, how many of you young prosecutors out there have never lost a case, never lost a motion? And all the young prosecutors raised their hands. And he said, welcome to the chicken blank club. If you are winning all of your cases all the time, you're not taking the tough cases. I don't want you to go out and lose a case, but you better start taking some of the tough cases. All the hands came down, lots of faces got red. Well, there's a new book out, and actually the ABA has nominated this book by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jesse Elsinger. It's called The Chicken Blank Club. I won't use the proper name. Why the Justice Department Fails to Prosecute Executives. So what I'd like to do is segue from what Claire was speaking about and talk about where criminal and civil matters meet. So when U.S. attorneys take up these cases quite often, whistleblower cases, False Claims Act cases, often there are criminal and civil penalties. More and more these days, I will echo what Mr. Comey believed was happening and what Mr. Elsinger's premise is that U.S. prosecutors and prosecutors in general are moving away from prosecuting criminal matters with jail time and are looking at the money. What do you think, folks? Are we looking too much at the money and not enough at putting people away? Too big to fail? Too big to jail?
Sure, that's the major problem here. For example, the New York City prosecutor, she's doing a great job there, but the Purdue company, as you heard in the earlier session, is one of the main problems here with oxycodone and with this whole thing. And they ended up, nobody went to jail there. They paid a lot of money, and they walked away. And now they're back because they're being sued again. But also, the academic area is not taking leads here. For example, there was a conviction just the other day in Rhode Island. A doctor got convicted finally. He was a professor of medicine at Brown University, and he was paid $188,000 by Subsys Company. That's the one with the fentanyl lollipops. And he got sentenced finally to 51 months in jail.
All right, and those are the doctors, which I really do want to touch on here. But let's focus in on large corporations, because we have seen some historically very large False Claims Act whistleblower settlements. A lot of them right here in Philadelphia, whether you're talking about some of the big drug companies, 3.5 million, 2.2 million, billion, sorry, B, not M. Bank of America, 17 billion. And we look at all of these cases, historic settlements. I remember when Norton was the poster child for the big settlement in the 1990s, 400 million. We have eclipsed that by several
How did
iterations.
we start our foundation?
So right now we're at a place where U.S. prosecutors are settling these cases, but no one is going to jail, and corporations, Don Migliore, are settling these cases and pleading to misdemeanors. Why is that?
Well, I'm a civil lawyer.
I
and I'm gonna
understand,
hide
but
behind that.
I figured you could segue.
But I also have to say this. I'm here because of my experience in civil litigation and why that system works. But I'm a true believer that civil litigation works as a component part of addressing a problem. Prosecutions are critically important, find themselves involved with issues, whether it be the BP oil spill, whether it be tobacco, and are necessarily involved in mass torts, but more so as the impact is greater in society. So there is a role for it. I don't know when it's appropriate. We don't get into any kind of litigation with device manufacturers or pharmaceutical companies for the point of putting them out of business. People go into the civil justice system for information, accountability, prevention, and compensation. The component part of punishment in civil law is only speaks in money. That's all you can get out of the system that I operate in, not the prior panel. But when that punishment isn't sufficient because it's only dollars, there's absolutely a need for it to be addressed, as the general from Georgia said. It's a multifaceted problem. At this epic level, it has to be addressed from different angles.
And Jerry Ann, thankfully, again, your company has not been involved in this, but you're a pretty straight shooter with these kinds of issues. So if you're a pharma exec and you know that you may be liable for maybe $1 billion, $2 billion, but no one's going to walk the plank, and under the rules, if I'm correct, you're not going to have to plead guilty to a felony, because once you plead guilty to a felony, corporate crime, what happens?
Well, I don't want to anticipate what happens because
No,
I'm not
certainly you don't.
I'm not playing in that sandbox.
Right. No, I know you don't, but certainly you must be familiar with the fact that most of these companies plead guilty to a misdemeanor, because if they pled guilty to a felony, their products would be pulled off could be pulled off the market. Have been pulled off the market.
And CEOs of companies that have done lesser things than we've described here with respect to the opioid crisis have actually faced jail time. CEOs have faced jail time. And I know of one example in particular where the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company, publicly traded company, oversized hydrocodone tablets. Now, you would think that that would be the responsibility of someone in their manufacturing facility, but indeed, the responsibility fell on the shoulders of the chief executive officer, as it should have.
Well, again, I won't beat this horse for too much longer, but I think it's important to raise this issue. And Don says, look, we're in the business of making sure that there's compensation, that people get stung, and that the people who've been hurt, are recompensed. And I get that, and we're going to go there. But when I see that there's a responsible corporate officer doctrine, when we have corporate integrity agreements, and companies have pled guilty to a misdemeanor, they pay a large fine, and then we see them again and again. Purdue is a very good example of that. And one last point on this, and Steve, you can probably elaborate on this, is that when a corporation pleads guilty to that misdemeanor, and then the U.S. Attorney's Office hits them with a fine, it can be split between civil sanction and criminal penalties. Now, if it's a criminal penalty, they don't get to write it off. If it's a civil penalty, they do get to write it off. And one of the premises of this Elsinger book is that maybe prosecutors have become a little too lazy, and they're settling these cases, and that civil portion gets larger and larger, and guess what? We, the taxpayer, are paying for a portion of that.
We are. There's another problem to it. who your lawyer is a real problem. For example, in the Purdue case in New York City, they hired the Giuliani firm. Originally, they would have gone to jail. Sacklers, remember that name? They made billions and they're very wealthy now. So they hired the Giuliani firm. Guess what? They didn't go to jail. Just paid some fines and some money. That is a problem. The law firms involved, and that has to be looked at in the context of this whole opioid problem. There are two areas that are being neglected. One is the responsibility of lawyers. That needs to be checked. Do they have responsibility when they know their client has engaged in what probably led to the death of many people? Two, the FDA. This started as a result of the FDA's conduct, in my opinion, back in the 90s. And I put the blame on a couple of key FDA employees, and I think Dr. Kolodny will agree with me. And I think the problem is the FDA should not have approved this drug in the first place. The patent office never should have approved it. And then where has the FDA been since this drug was approved in the 90s? It's like a Russian general.
Dr. Kolodny.
Yeah, so I agree completely. I think that had FDA done its job properly, had it enforced the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act back in 95 when Purdue was introducing OxyContin, had it enforced the law properly, I don't think we would be here today. I don't think we would have an opioid addiction epidemic. Had they enforced the law says that drug companies can only promote their products for conditions where the product has been proven safe and effective, conditions where the benefits of using the drug outweigh the risks. Those conditions become the indication on the label, and if the company gets caught promoting outside of that indication, it's off-label and they can get into trouble. Had FDA properly enforced the law when OxyContin was introduced, it would have told Purdue Pharma, great, you've got extended release oxycodone, sounds like a good drug to use in palliative care. We're going to give you a palliative care indication. We're going to let you send your drug reps to the hospices, to the oncologists, to the palliative care doctors. But the risks of the drug outweigh its benefits if it's prescribed for headaches and low back pain and by dentists. So we're not going to let you promote to the primary care doctors, to the dentists, to the family doctors. We're not going to let you send your sales force to those prescribers. Had FDA done that, I don't think we would have an epidemic today. And certainly that was in 95, 96. You could give some of the doctors who worked at the FDA the benefit of the doubt in the early years. You could say that they were being duped by the same multifaceted campaign that was really duping the medical community in general, leading us to believe that opioids are not really addictive and they're safe and effective for long-term use. But certainly by 2001, even by 1999, there were reports coming out of Appalachia and New England of OxyContin addiction and overdose deaths. And by 2002, the problem is on the radar of members of Congress who are holding hearings. FDA is beginning to hear complaints from Congress. By 2002, it's clear that the prescribing has taken off at a rate far greater than could be clinically needed, and that there are rising rates of addiction and overdose deaths. And at that point, FDA really could have taken the right actions. They could have narrowed the indication, and they also could have changed the rules, because at this point, other drug companies want to get their extended release opioids on the market. Purdue had taken an old molecule, repackaged it as extended release and turned it into a blockbuster. That's a nice model that other drug companies want to replicate. So they've all got their opioids in the pipeline. There was a lot FDA could have done, and instead, and it was Janet Woodcock who was really in charge at the FDA.
Janet was in charge of that, and Janet, we've got to get her out of there immediately. She's a danger to the country.
I often say to Steve on my program, don't mince words, tell me how you really feel.
She has been a danger for years.
So, as far as, I certainly will, but as far as the FDA goes, we know that you cannot sue the king. So we're talking about the FDA here, but as far as any kind of legal matter, legal action, we cannot possibly
I just want to sort of
launch.
finish this point. So, in 2002, they could have done the right thing. They could have narrowed the indication and changed the approval process. They actually didn't narrow the indication. They held a meeting. They asked for advice, an expert panel of doctors who were working for opioid manufacturers, leading the campaign to increase prescribing. They went actually in the opposite direction. They changed the approval process to make it easier for other drug companies to get their opioids on the market. So what we got from 2002 to today is a steady stream of new opioids being approved. And each time a new opioid hit the market, the drug company that brought it to market had to make, it takes millions to bring a product to market. It had to recoup its investment. The only way you do that is by getting prescribing to go up. So each new opioid approval was pouring fuel on a fire, and that's basically what we've been getting from the FDA.
And Steve, you mentioned Janet Woodcock a moment ago, but I know you've gone on record, but it's not just Woodcock, in your opinion, and other plaintiffs' position as well, is that you've called them, the big pharma alumni club.
Yeah,
and
that
has been a and we
major
have,
problem, too.
Now, some would say that the FDA should be populated by people who have experience in the industry. And I'm going to get to you in just a second, Jerry Ann. But others would say it's been a rotating door of the biggest names from the pharma industry, and they're just a little too close.
Yeah, that's a major problem. Some of the top FDA people come right out of Janssen and Johnson & Johnson, which is based here in New Jersey, and Janssen is a Pennsylvania corporation. Now, nobody here probably realizes it, but you can't sue a New Jersey corporation for an FDA-approved drug for punitive damages. So J&J and I have been fighting this, I have it up in the courts now, you cannot punish them in a civil case because New Jersey legislators, supposedly according to their courts, have given them immunity from punitive damages. So you have to prove that individual damages. Now, right now, J&J counts for a huge number of cases in our court system, thousands. In the Risperdal, we have 6,000 cases pending here in Philadelphia. So they've blocked our court system. Do you realize how hard it is to push that through? Their products, they operate under subsidiaries. Janssen is a subsidiary of J&J. Their Ethicon, their vaginal mesh, Dupuis, their hip implants, they have it's crazy how many cases they have. So the real question I have is what are the law firms doing when they become aware of it? Well, right now, I have 5 straight verdicts against Janssen on failure to warn in the case of Risperdal. One of them recently brought a $70 million verdict. I've hit Janssen in a whistleblower case. They were ordered to pay and settled it for $2.2 billion. That's just on Risperdal. So the point of it is we have to change our justice system. Now, why did Janssen have that occurred? Do you know, the courts ordered documents sealed in that case. Those documents are the ones that we finally got out in the 5 recent verdicts in the last 2 years. We couldn't get them out. I had gone all the way up to New Jersey courts, all the way in Philadelphia. I think it's 8 judges wouldn't let me just make public those documents.
But you've made progress along the way, and even though you never, again, got any kind of criminal sanctions, you've got recompense for litigants, and you've been able to pierce the veil of sorts with the FDA. I wanted to go to Jerry Ann here because, again, being a pharma exec, I would have to think of anyone on the panel, you would have to think the notion of preemption is not a bad idea. So if a drug company, and Purdue and others are certainly claiming that, it's like, hey, if the FDA has approved it, and the plaintiff's attorneys would say that's their get-out-of-jail-free card. But pharma execs would say that gives us blanket protection. What of it, Jerry Ann?
Well, I think it's an overgeneralization to say that the US FDA does not do a good job in examining clinical data and making a determination as to which drugs should be approved and which shouldn't. And it's been my experience working in the industry for 30 years that they do a relatively good job. Now, like any institution, they will be making mistakes. We happen to deal with a different branch of the US FDA in my current role in a women's healthcare company, which is the Division of Urologic and Reproductive Products. And I will say that they're very stringent. That doesn't mean, again, that they won't make mistakes. And yes, indeed, when you get an approval, it is after lengthy, at least in our case and in the examples that I've had in the industry, it has been after lengthy and very expensive clinical trials. The data that you gather, though, is data from a very specialized patient population. So you have what's known as inclusion and exclusion criteria, which limits the type of patients that are largely included in your clinical trial and for whom you collect information to demonstrate statistical significance. And therein lies the rub, because once that drug enters the general population and is prescribed by a multitude of physicians with different specialties and subspecialties for individuals with different types of conditions, it may indeed be the case that you create more of a problem than you intended. That means that you need to pull back the reins. So yes, indeed, they got an approval, but those manufacturers of opioids, once the data began to become ever present and ever clearer that it was causing more addiction, there was a need to have an adjustment in the labeling of the product.
And if the FDA does not command it, do you believe that the pharma company has an affirmative duty to do it themselves?
I believe that is the ethical responsibility of a pharmaceutical company to re-examine their data through post-marketing surveillance, and after examining that information, to take the responsible decision to request an advisory meeting with the US FDA and a recommendation they need to be preemptive and request such a change.
Now, Dr. Kolodny was talking a little while ago about the FDA as well, and I mentioned you can't sue the king, so you can't go after the FDA. You can go after the learned intermediary, but as our last panel raised, is that really a wise choice? Mike Moore of tobacco fame from Mississippi said, you know, you've really got three choices. You've got the FDA, can't go after them. You've got the docs, probably not the best choice, course of action. And you have the pharma companies. And even though perhaps there's enough blame to go around with all three of those sectors, the one that made a lot of money should be the ones that civil trial attorneys should go after. So before we get to that, Dr. Tom, the learned intermediary, pharmaceutical companies are going to stand behind that as well. On one hand, you know, preemption, they're protected here. They're protected because the learned intermediary makes that decision. He is the one dispensing the drug to the patient. Does that have merit?
You're saying, do doctors bear some responsibility for the problem?
That's a sure way of saying it, yes.
Absolutely, Doctor.
And can pharmaceutical companies stand behind the notion that, hey, we are not responsible, not so responsible, because the doctors are on the firing lines?
Doctors definitely bear responsibility for the problem, but the pharmaceutical companies absolutely cannot hide behind that because the pharmaceutical companies were misleading doctors in a variety of ways that it's easy to document over a period of years, and telling them that these drugs are safe when they're not safe, telling them that they're effective when they're not effective, and telling that with people in their practices. So a lot of this responsibility goes with the pharmaceutical companies. And if I could back up to some of the other points here, I do
Absolutely.
think for all the discussion about criminal and civil liabilities, regulatory solutions are what should have prevented this in the first place, and where we ideally ought to be trying to address this in the future. I always am, it's a shame when we have to fall back on lawsuits when really what we have is a regulatory failure. Even so, though, when that happens, the discussion often is around, well, is this, should the executive go to jail? Or how much money is in the settlement? And from my perspective, what really matters is what happens from this point forward in the behavior of the pharmaceutical companies. And those aren't determinative in that. What really matters is, and if there's a lawsuit or criminal case, under what rules does a pharmaceutical company have to operate in the future? So I don't know if that's injunctive relief. I don't know all these legal terms, or if that's regulation, but That's more important than whether the person goes into jail or not, I think. And the dollar amount of the settlement isn't as important as do those dollars actually go to deal with the problem that has occurred or to prevent it in the future. In the tobacco case, that wasn't the case. There was a huge amount of money that quickly got diverted by legislatures to everything other than smoking prevention. And that's
So you don't agree that there was a significant re-education campaign there? through
Absolutely not.
television
That money
commercials and
was,
that
from
sort of thing?
public health perspective, it was all wasted.
Go ahead, Don.
I can't agree with that completely because I think this problem is way too big to be just viewed as a single regulatory problem. Regulatory answers don't have the capacity alone to fix what we're talking about. They are a component part of it, just as the criminal side of it's a component part, as the first panel was talking about, and the civil side has to be a component part. The civil side is not just about compensation. That is a component of it. But the impact of information, and my biggest criticism of the system that I've dedicated myself to, which is the civil justice system, is that we as plaintiff lawyers have allowed protective orders to keep information that we learn contained and cloaked.
Major problem.
That information's cloaked from public awareness. When I started at Ness Motley 20 plus years ago, my first assignment was to work as a handling attorney for the former United States Surgeon General Julius Richmond under Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter said to me that what you do in civil litigation by getting this information out to the public has done more in tobacco than I could do in the 4 years that I was the United States Surgeon General. Because what your trials do, even if you lose, is it educates the public on the important issues like marketing to children, like conduct, the types of psychological crutch strategies in marketing to blue-collar workers. So I am not saying that the civil justice system is the answer. I'm saying it's an important component of the answer. And Julius Richmond, as in Surgeon General, had in his budget for public awareness of the health hazards of smoking for an entire year what the tobacco industry had for a single day of marketing. And so the idea that this is just about money is way oversimplifying what the civil justice system is about. It is a system that does work, and you cannot just attack this problem by saying the regulatory system has the capacity. Because
Yeah, I noticed
FDA
that-
simply does not just have the capacity.
Understood. And I noticed that both of you really just kind of breeze past the learned intermediary notion. But is there any way within, again, the purview of the civil litigation system that, you know, if we're going to make something count, if we're going to make someone feel the sting, is there anything that can be done? We know about the pharma companies and civil litigation. What about the medical profession? Is there anything that can be done
There's a problem
in this
there.
area that would be able, let me just get Dr. Tom and we'll go to you,
Yeah,
Steve.
but
Go
there's
ahead,
a
Dr.
problem
Tom.
with that.
You know, again, I'm a doctor, not a lawyer, so I don't know what sort of legal tools there are, but I can say I view the problem with physicians or prescribers more broadly as really two problems. There's the broad number of physicians that are basically out there doing what they're taught to do, what they feel like the norm is, which is still prescribing too much. They're not fully aware of the problem, they have been misled, and they don't deserve to go to jail for that. Then there's the small fraction of doctors that are pill mills, that are fully aware they're prescribing way outside of norms. They don't care, they're making an awful lot of money. As far as I'm concerned, they're worse than the street corner drug dealer, and I wish they were in jail.
So it's not so much about greed, they've been hoodwinked, is what you're saying.
Well, group one has been hoodwinked, and group two is greed. And so we need to figure out how to put in place educational and other means to prevent the ones that are otherwise well-meaning, to bring their practices more in line with what is appropriate. But then for the small number out there who are really just like street corner drug dealers, they need the full criminal prosecution.
Dr. Clogney and then Steve.
Yeah, so
Go ahead, Doc.
I agree with Tom that you do have these two groups of docs, the well-meaning docs who've inadvertently gotten people addicted, and you have the drug dealing doctors. I think it's important to understand the contribution of each to the opioid crisis, because something you'll often hear, the AMA is beginning to change its tune a bit, But for many years, the AMA was describing the opioid crisis as being all about the bad apples. They're the opioid crisis is that we've got some bad apple doctors who run pill mills, and you've got some bad apple people pretending to be pain patients who really just are drug abusers. And any time an intervention was proposed that might require doctors to do something a little differently, the AMA would respond, you know, you're going to penalize all of the good doctors and patients for the bad behavior of the bad apples. And there certainly are these pill mill doctors, but the bigger problem all along have been the well-meaning doctors who are inadvertently getting people addicted and creating customers for the pill mill doctors. The people who seek out these pill mill doctors are usually already addicted. They're seeking out the pill mill doctor in the same way you seek out a drug dealer on the corner. You need now somebody to supply you. And just on the point of the learned intermediary, as Tom was saying, you know, you're not a learned intermediary if you've been deceived. And I think for many people, if you're not a physician and you hear Tom or if you hear me say that, you know, the doctors were deceived, you may be thinking, you know, come on, you guys went to medical school. Doctors are supposed to be smart. How could you have fallen for the idea that these pills are not really addictive? And what you have to understand is that, you know, we weren't just hearing this directly from the sales reps or directly from advertising. We were hearing it from pain specialists eminent in the field of pain medicine. We were hearing it from our professional societies. We were hearing it from our state medical boards, from our hospitals, from every direction. You were hearing that patients are suffering because we've been too stingy and puritanical with these drugs, that the risk of addiction is very low, and that these are a gift from Mother Nature. We can be much more compassionate if we prescribe more. And you start to, the message is that if you're an enlightened physician, you'll prescribe opioids for just about every complaint of pain. And we really did fall for it.
When do you think the medical profession should have realized that only 1% of the people are going to get addicted to this, and 2, it's going to treat chronic pain?
Well, this is a little tricky to follow, but the way in which they convinced us that opioids are not really addictive was to rely on a half-truth. What they told us was that every patient that takes an opioid for even more than a week is going to become physically dependent on the drug. That is benign and natural. That just means they're going to feel sick if they stop it abruptly. That's like getting a headache if you don't have your coffee. That's like your blood pressure jumping up if you don't take your blood pressure pill. Physical dependence is benign. It's going to happen to everybody. True addiction, that's extremely rare. And because you've been confusing these two concepts, because you've been confusing physical dependence and addiction, you're allowing people to suffer. Real addiction is going to be exceptionally rare. Of course, that was totally not true. It's half true, because physiological dependence and addiction are not identical. If everybody in this room took an opioid for a week, every day for a week, and then stopped it, you'd feel sick. That doesn't mean you all became addicted. But physiological dependence and addiction are very closely related. One of the reasons, the main reason opioids are so highly addictive is the physiological dependence that sets in. Once you're taking it regularly and you try and stop and you feel really sick and your pain is getting worse, that makes you want to continue to use the drug. And so that's how they convinced us that opioids are rarely addictive. And then when what they were saying didn't seem to make sense, what they told us was that, oh, you know, we were wrong about that 1%. What we forgot is that a subset of our population, maybe 10% of our population, are addicts, abusers, or prone to addiction, and we forgot about them. And those are the people that you have to be careful of. There are some people out there that are risky, but the drug itself is not addictive. You just have to not give it to those risky people, which of course is also not true. With highly addictive drugs, just about anybody who takes it repeatedly can get addicted.
Steve Scheller, and then I want to get to the critical mass of civil lawsuits.
Well, Dr. Kolodny is absolutely right. Pursuing the doctors also was made doubly difficult in the last several years by the doctors' organizations. They basically said this was creating a disaster for the cost of medical care. Philadelphia was declared a judicial hellhole. I declare New Jersey a judicial hellhole against the pharma industry because it's so pro-pharma. But the point I'm making is it became extremely expensive to pursue the cases. The doctors always manage, you have to provide expert testimony, which is extremely expensive. So the plaintiff's lawyers found that it became very difficult to pursue a claim against the doctor. And then on top of that, you were fighting the pain management people organization, and they always managed to get top experts, usually from some of the top universities. For example, I'm sure that doctor in Rhode Island would be happy to testify for a pain doctor. And that's what we faced. So as a result, it became much, much more difficult. Now we face the drug industry, certain companies, bollocksing up the court system. And they're being allowed to do this by our judiciary. They refuse to settle cases, and they cause so many injuries. You're talking about not a single or a double injury. You're talking about thousands, for example, in Risperdal, where I'm involved, where we got those 5 verdicts. Thousands of boys, little boys, grew female breasts. That's what the drug caused. They knew it, but the information was not disclosed. I ended up spending several years trying to get that information public. If I made it public under a court order, I could go to jail. So I couldn't disclose it. It was a disgrace. Now it came out because it's allowed to come out because I had that discovery in trial. I filed my own petition with the FDA. It's called Citizens Petition, at my own expense. I hired a very fine law firm, and we took it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Guess what? The federal courts ruled that I did not have standing because I couldn't use one of my children as an objector. But
Steve,
that's what goes on.
But if you cut to the end of the story now, however, I think punitive damages are
Well,
back
we
on the table.
just succeeded.
Right.
But they're taking an appeal with the top law firm, defense firms in the country, facing 3 major Philadelphia defense firms. In the one case, we got the Superior Court finally to rule in our favor, thank God. And now they're still taking it up to the state Supreme Court. They just keep it going. And
let's get to some of the
what
individual lawsuits. We're running out of time here. So Ohio's Attorney General Mike DeWine said that he knew that Purdue was never going to come to the table without a critical mass of lawsuits by cities and states. Have we reached that critical mass? Blank stares. Well, where are we? We'll step a half step back here. To maybe the lay person, it may, if they're paying attention, it looks disjointed. You have states, you have cities. In some ways, it's a mass tort. It's really not a mass tort. It's a class action. No, it's not a class action. So how do you describe this? Where are we what is the status of civil litigation against the opioid companies today, if you had to synopsize that to the lay person in 25 words or less? Impossible.
Well, in 2007, Purdue got into trouble for the specific false things they said about OxyContin. So they got into trouble for promoting OxyContin as being less addictive because of its extended release. It was a case. They were found guilty of misbranding, and they weren't. After that case, they were not able to continue doing those same things. But what that case missed was really the worst of what Purdue had done. The worst of what Purdue had done and other opioid manufacturers were really the non-branded aspects of their campaign. It was the way in which they had changed the way the medical community thought about opioids as a class of drug. The cases today that are being filed by counties across the country and states across the country are really focused on the worst of what had been done. The promoting of opioids as safe and effective for daily long-term use, and obviously not just Purdue, but other opioid manufacturers. And so we're seeing these cases across the country. I think only 2 states have gotten past the motion to dismiss. And for many of the counties, and I think a couple of states have been rolled up into a single MDL in a Cleveland courtroom.
And in the past, these things have been kind of hit and miss. Like, for example, you were talking about Risperdal before. I think South Carolina and a few other states were successful in pursuing, a remuneration from the drug companies. Pennsylvania didn't even throw their hats in the ring. But I'm wondering if the same thing is happening now. So give me a little insight here. Where are the states? Where is Pennsylvania? Where is Philadelphia? Civil litigation.
Philadelphia, we filed our own suit for Philadelphia. I'm one of the counsel for the suit. And the city solicitors here and the district attorney, the city filed, both the DA and the city of Philadelphia filed civil and civil suits. They're pending, and that's going on right now. The attorney generals, there's a group, I think of 40, have gotten all together. I'm not so sure I would subscribe to that. We're not going to join in. We're protecting the city of Philadelphia, which is probably one of the very worst problems for the whole country, maybe the worst. We have more deaths. I think what do we have, 1,400 last year?
1,200.
1,200?
But so the highest overdose fatality rate of any major big city by far.
Yeah, he's done everything you can imagine trying to solve this problem. I don't know how he manages to survive sometimes. It's very painful for a lot of us. Those of us who've had relatives and friends, the health commissioner, it is a mess. And we're going to be tied up in the court system. And on top of that now, the attorney general's cases, thank God we're not stuck in the morass of an MDL. We're not looking for just money. This is not, frankly, for me, about money. This is about solving one of the worst crises in our country. That's what this is about. Money paid. I was involved in tobacco litigation. I represented with a group of attorneys the state of California. Got $22 billion for the state. Dan got God knows how much. I know Motley's boat, I've been on it.
Is this thing on? No,
But the point is, this is not about money. This is about what's going on in our country. And I am really angry at what I see happening. And the FDA has to be dealt with. The politics has to be dealt with. This is coming down to a real political problem. We had an election in Pennsylvania last week where a very fine young man managed to squeak out a victory in Western Pennsylvania. Colin Lamb is his name. I have a son-in-law whose family lives there. We were involved a bit. And here's a guy who graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, undergraduate, the University of Pennsylvania Law School, went into the Marines, was a Marine captain, a prosecutor, and you know what the Republicans did? They ran an ad against him.
Now, the thing is that area of Pennsylvania, that area of Pennsylvania has been really very, very hard hit. And part of the pushback, for example, Reason Magazine, which I know you push back against, Doc, but the premise is that are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Do not opioid drugs play a positive role at some point in time? And aren't these people predisposed to this kind of drug addiction and physical dependence because of economic circumstances? You push back against that. I suspect you'll do that now.
Yeah, no, I will. So opioids are very important medicines for easing pain at the end of life. They play a very important role when you use them for a couple of days after major surgery. And for some people with chronic pain, if they're taken intermittently on a really bad day as opposed to around the clock for weeks and months, if they're taken intermittently, they can also be helpful for some people with chronic pain. When you measure opioid consumption in the United States, there are two ways really you can measure consumption. You can count the number of prescriptions written, or you can measure consumption in terms of weight, in terms of morphine equivalents consumed. If you were to measure consumption in terms of prescriptions, Purdue loves to always tell reporters we're only 2% of the prescriptions. Why is everybody picking on us? And that's true because the vast majority of prescriptions are written for acute pain problems with a few pills and they're a low dose. If you measure in terms of consumption, in terms of weight, Purdue's product is actually one of the biggest players, And the vast majority of the opioid consumption in the United States in terms of weight is for people with chronic non-cancer pain. And the biggest conditions there are axial low back pain. It's basically low back pain with a normal spine, fibromyalgia, chronic headache. These are the three conditions that account for the bulk of the opioid consumption in the United States. And the leading experts, I treat addiction, the leading experts who study and treat these conditions, fibromyalgia, low back pain, and chronic headache, there is no controversy. There is a clear consensus that opioids are lousy drugs for these conditions, that they are far more likely to harm the patient than help the patient, that if taken long-term, they'll even make the patient's pain worse. Now, the medical community is beginning to understand this, thanks in part to the CDC and efforts to really communicate this. And so doctors are starting to figure it out. The problem is we have about 8 to 12 million Americans on chronic opioid therapy, and it's going to be very hard for them to come off. You know, we were in a similar circumstance in the early 2000s with estrogen replacement therapy. There was a time when I was in medical school, we told every postmenopausal woman, you have to go on estrogen replacement therapy. And when they said, but I heard something about breast cancer, we'd say the risk is minimal and it's heart disease that kills women, and this will lower your risk of heart disease. And we put every postmenopausal woman on estrogen replacement therapy. In 2002, paper came out and we realized, oh boy, we were wrong. The risk of breast cancer is significant, and this doesn't decrease risk of heart disease. And on a dime, the medical community was able to stop putting every woman on estrogen replacement therapy. We took women off. And if you look at the epidemiology of estrogen-sensitive breast cancer, within a few years after the practice change, you saw it start to come down. Unfortunately, we can't do that now with opioids because the millions of people who've been put on these medications are not going to be able to come off easily. Many may never be able to come off, and they're going to need lifelong addiction treatment. And many of these patients are very afraid right now because some of their doctors are starting to say to them, you know, your backache should have gotten better 5 years ago. I'm not going to keep giving this to you. And these are people who may have tried to get themselves off already, and they're very afraid, what does this mean for me? Does this mean I'm going to have to line up at a methadone clinic? Does this mean I'm going to be buying heroin on the street? And so these patients are becoming very active and vocal, and there's a lot of vitriol and even threats against people who are calling for more cautious prescribing.
Jerry Ann, would you like to make a comment? I just saw you nodding. I didn't know if...
So I'm very familiar with what happened with hormone replacement therapy because I worked in women's health for the vast majority of my career and still do. And I'm a developer of drugs for women that are not systemic. And in fact, one of the comments that I was going to make is that in general, drug developers have always focused on systemic therapy to treat regional or local conditions when it's unnecessary. With hormone replacement therapy, more recently, the panacea has been with women who absolutely have debilitating symptoms of menopause to place them on lower. It's not non-systemic because it does get into the bloodstream, but lower systemic exposure. And I argue that regional, local therapy for most of these painful conditions, obviously, if you have to have palliation because of cancer pain, you may need a systemic therapy, which may mean you need an opioid. But if you have knee pain or if you have tooth pain, you do not need systemic therapy to address that. What I keep hearing, though, is that we're talking about the problem or what happened in the past, and what we need to be discussing is what we can do about the future. Mm-hmm. One suggestion that I would have about what we can do is we need to think sensitively and compassionately about those individuals who are trying to wean off of their opiates, regardless of how that happened. The second thing is we need to ask the pharmaceutical companies that are responsible for creating this problem to fund, just like the tobacco manufacturers did, to fund that campaign, to fund better drug development that involves alternatives to systemic therapy. And then thirdly, we need to help with behavioral support. That's what I've been hearing. But I really believe that those that are culpable need to be taken to task. As it pertains to the FDA, relabeling and placing black box warnings on these opioids would certainly chill those that are interested in prescribing them. And then investing in a full-on campaign for consumers and healthcare prescribers would certainly enhance that initiative.
We're going to open up the floor to questions here. We're just kind of right up against our time limit, but I think we have about 15 to 20 minutes. So Claire, go ahead.
I'm going to pick people out. Raise your hand high, but I'm actually going to take the liberty of asking the first question because my concern is that to the extent that part of our audience is non-legal, and we're also live streaming, so we may have a larger non-legal audience, that the theory of the case, of these civil cases, hasn't completely come out from this discussion. So I'd like to ask you to clarify a little bit, anyone who wants to take this, maybe Don would be a great person to take this, what the theory of these cases in general doesn't have to be so specific, and what the best answer, what the strongest arguments on the other side might be, right? Because I really want to bring out the tension that people might perceive around this issue.
I'm happy to start. I have to disclose, I represent states' attorneys general, that is my office does. I represent counties. I represent cities, that is my firm does. I can't talk about what's known through protective orders that are out there, and I can't characterize the evidence, and I can't characterize what our strategies are. All of that said, this panel sort of formed around the concept of what's the civil justice system's role in this kind of problem, which has a magnitude like tobacco, but in so many ways this has nothing to do and is not like the tobacco litigation. And it is more like the typical pharmaceutical litigation that Stephen talks about, in the sense that there is a learned intermediary defense. There is a defense that the patients are all addicts and they're the abusers, not us, the company that's trying to save lives. But the similarity of this litigation is much more akin to the typical mass tort pharmaceutical case than it is the tobacco AG action that everyone wants to liken it to. So that said, generically speaking, the theories are in product liability. The theories are in negligence. There are some theories in public nuisance. There are some theories in unfair trade practices. There are RICO claims. The different avenues and angles, and the reason why there's a consolidation of this litigation in a multi-district court, is that every state has a different set of facts and a different set of laws. And every claim, whether it be at an attorney general level under a parens patriae theory or at a county level, is dependent on that state's constitutional, legislative, and common law limitations. So it's way too big a question to ask, where are we in the state of litigation? Because it's so big that this process is trying to find the commonalities in order to get to a certain end game. But the basic theory, of the case is a company is responsible for its product. There's a Supreme Court case called D'Artes, which is old as can be, that talks about product liability theory. You put a product into the market, you're responsible for it. You test it, and you prove to the FDA that you believe it's efficacious and safe, you still have the obligation to make sure that that's what happens after you've now sold it and made money selling it over decades. So the theory is you own that responsibility. And as that theory travels down, generally speaking in pharmaceutical cases, the distributor would, in some states and under some laws, the distributor has the obligation to know what it's passing through ultimately to a consumer and how much of it is getting through And so that theory is simply, if you're going to make profit in this joint venture of distribution with the manufacturer, then you are responsible for the causation, the net effect of that entering into the market. The theory in this case being, I'm going to take Bridget's comment with me everywhere I go. This is a case about overabundant supply. If there is so much supply, then everybody in that chain, where law permits, is responsible for the ultimate outcome or conduct or damage done by that. Now, the damage is defined by different states under different theories, and so the whole MDL process really is an organization of different parties harmed, different laws that apply, different injuries that result, whether it be direct injuries of care for opioid addiction or be things like HIV and Hep C for needle use that is causally related to opioid use. The damages are geographic, they're different in every place. The whole civil system, first of all, is capable. It's a component part of the answer. And the end result of this theory is that you try to find a way not only to fix it in terms of economic reparation, but in coming up with non-economic injunctive relief that has a meaningful long-term effect, like education, like funding different types of sources of information for public knowledge and awareness going forward. So it's really a huge academic question that could be a course, but that's in a generic way.
But for the lay person watching, maybe on the stream today, to simplify it, this is not just about a personal injury case and damages in a personal injury case.
No, and so that's the one way it's probably most like tobacco, in that we're talking about injuries to communities. This is such a large problem that it's not the individual user that is bringing an action because they took too much Vioxx and they ultimately suffered an injury, and therefore we're consolidating a bunch of individual user problems. Mm-hmm. What this case is that as a community, as a country, as a world, there's an injury that we think needs to be addressed, and as a component part of the solution, the civil justice system is trying to figure out how to address it without having the doctor be the only answer or having the FDA be the only answer, but how do we solve this thing systemically and have an accountability so that that accountability results in some kind of prevention from it ever happening again?
Okay, so we're going to be manning the mics here, and we have a question down here, and I think I'll be calling on people, so if you want to ask a question, raise your hand high so I can see you.
I have a question for Dr. Farley. There's been a controversial discussion in Philadelphia about safe injection sites, whether that will control or exacerbate the situation as it is in Philadelphia. Do you know what the status of that is, or how would that work?
So the mayor convened a task force to try to get the best advice on how to respond to this problem overall. The task force held a 5-month-long process involving 200 people on multiple subcommittees, community input, made 18 recommendations for all the things we need to do, which include prevention, and include more on treatment, a lot of what we do with law enforcement and using the law enforcement system to deal with the problem, overdose prevention. One of those 18 recommendations was that the city explore safe injection facilities or supervised injection facilities to prevent fatal overdose in people who are not yet in treatment, but that we hope will go into treatment in the future. The city looked into that, and the recommendation was we explore that. So the city officials looked into that, both in reviewing the scientific evidence for those and visiting a site in Vancouver that was in operation, has been in operation for more than a decade. And the conclusion from that was that Philadelphia could benefit from one of these sites, not as the solution to the crisis, but one of these many different things we need to do. So the city is now just in the stage of saying, now that we have concluded that we could benefit from this, we could save lives, get people into treatment with this, now we have to figure out how it could happen. And that's going to take us a while to figure that out. So we're still in the early stages of putting a plan in place.
Yeah, to follow up, I guess, why is Philadelphia the situation in Philadelphia is so bad as opposed to other places in the country. You were saying it's
Yeah.
probably the worst, certainly on a percentage basis.
Yeah, I can't fully answer that, and maybe that Andrew can help out. I can say that Philadelphia has the cheapest and purest heroin of any big city in the country. That's through DEA statistics. We've always had a heroin problem. We probably always will have a heroin problem. And bringing in all these people who are newly addicted from pills has then, you started with a pretty high floor to get to where we are right now. Then the arrival of fentanyl on the streets of Philadelphia has supercharged this problem in the last 2 years. Almost all of the samples that the law enforcement gets off the street of heroin now has fentanyl in it. And fentanyl is particularly potent and addictive and is being used by people who are already addicted. So I don't fully understand that, but I can say that we started with a problem to begin with, and the pill, newly addicted people from pills really added to that.
Yeah, this is a question mainly, I think, for the doctors on the panel. I've heard a lot of discussion on the news, picking up the newspaper almost every day about the horrible crisis that we're experiencing. And you, Dr. Farley, mentioned that as far as doctors are concerned, there are kind of two categories. There are the doctors who have sort of, I'll say, innocently prescribed opioids in small quantities initially for problems. Then there's the second category that are more the pill mill doctors. And I can understand that historically that may be the case, but it's hard for me to imagine that doctors like today, going forward, would still be prescribing in small quantities opioids for inappropriate uses. Is that still the case?
It is. So it's very reasonable for you to think, don't doctors read the newspaper and watch television like everybody else? Could they still really be overprescribing? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. We are still massively overprescribing. The prescribing of opioids in the United States, the consumption of opioids in the United States is far higher than any place else in the world. We're almost double Canada, and Canada is number 2 in the world and also has a pretty serious problem. I think that among prescribers, the bigger problem are the older doctors about my age and older, the ones who had it drilled into us for 15, 20 years that you need to be prescribing more. Young doctors, ones coming out of medical school today, not so much that the education got a lot better, but if you're a young doctor, if you're in your 30s, you've probably come of age, well, you came of age during the opioid addiction epidemic. You've probably lost friends to overdoses, and you're not falling for the same nonsense that patients don't get addicted. The bigger problem are the older doctors, a generation that was very seriously misinformed and not enough being done to correct the record. You want to know why doctors haven't changed, even though they're hearing about an addiction epidemic? Many of them are hearing about this problem in their mind, wow, we've got a problem with drug abusers. And a subset of our population are drug abusers. They don't recognize that their prescriptions are causing more addiction.
I ask a question of the audience. How many of you have been to a dentist in the last year and got a prescription for 30 Percocets? Now, Dr. Farley put a stop to that in New York, and he's doing that here to some degree, but not enough. We have to do much more.
Yeah.
The dentists are in this. This is the first point we've raised about dentists, but they're there.
Yeah. If I could just add that there are policies also that have continue to push doctors to prescribe more, where they are regulatory agencies make sure that you ask every patient, do they have pain on every visit? So when I go to see my doctor and I'm just as happy as I am today, they say, are you in pain? And I think, why are you asking me that question? I'm fine. And they are dinged by the regulatory agencies if they don't ask that question, and their perception is if they don't get that pain score down to 0, then they haven't given enough opioids. So those policies linger, and those didn't just happen. It was at the push of the pharmaceutical industries those policies were put in place.
Well, explain what you did in New York that helped change it.
Good afternoon. My name is Lee Owens. I serve as the Community Engagement Director for the District Attorney's Office here in Philly. Someone brought up the safe injection sites, and that's something that our current District Attorney has said over and over that he stands behind. Obviously, he's not a legislator, but it's also something that the mayor stands behind as well. But from a community perspective, I guess my question would be, I go to a lot of community events. I talk to a lot of, regular lay people, that are directly affected by this opioid crisis. And they, and people get their information from various sources. They get their information from elected officials. They get their information from the media. And so, but there was one forum in particular where it was literally a divided line between people that support the safe injection sites and people that don't. And again, these are regular lay members that get their information from various sources. What would you guys say from a community engagement perspective is the right sort of, I guess, a conversation to have when you're talking to people that don't necessarily have all the information when it comes to the court of public opinion, because we know public opinion means everything. Now, we may think that these safe injection sites are the way to go, but we're also in the business of selling this to the people. So can someone want to address that?
Yeah, if I could address this. So, it's a new idea, the idea of having a facility where people can use illegal drugs to keep them alive and encourage them to go into treatment. So everybody has an immediate reaction and say, well, I'm not so sure that's a good idea. I can say this, that when we had the mayor's task force last year, we had these listening sessions. This was probably the single most common recommendation we heard from the people in those listening sessions. Nonetheless, I know that there are people who are still uncomfortable with it. We are going to have another whole set of community engagement sessions. There's 8 of them scheduled over the next, 4 weeks or so. And so we're going to have an opportunity to have more thorough discussion about this. It's the sort of thing that a lot of people need to hear about it, hear the facts, turn it over before they can get comfortable with it. But it does save lives, and at the end, I think people are convinced that, if that was my daughter out there who was injecting drugs, I'd like to try to keep her alive until she went into treatment too.
I have a question for Dr. Chladni. You were very early in terms of working with a committee of physicians who are concerned about overprescribing. If you came through medical school with the same education that everybody else did, how was it that you became attuned to overprescribing more quickly than anybody else?
Well, I picked up on it pretty early because I was treating opioid addiction. And I started treating opioid addiction while working for New York City's health department on preventing overdoses. And the health department was trying to get doctors to treat opioid addiction more often with a medicine called buprenorphine. A lot of doctors weren't interested in doing it, so I figured I'd give it a try, and I started treating opioid addiction. And I thought when I started, I would be treating survivors of the heroin epidemic in the 1970s from East Harlem, South Bronx, Central Brooklyn. That's who I assumed would be coming in for treatment. And instead, the people coming in were from Staten Island, Long Island, New Jersey, Westchester, and they were young and old, and they had all become addicted to prescription opioids. And so I was seeing it firsthand. I was seeing the data from other parts of the country, and I remember from some of the early reports of people, there was a report from showing emergency room visits and overdose deaths, and it had increased so rapidly in such a short period of time, it looked almost as if a decimal point must have been in the wrong place, and it turned out to be real. And so you had a sense that something was really going wrong here, but as we started to recognize that the overprescribing was fueling the problem, the opioid lobby, the manufacturers, and to some extent the distributors as well, kept putting out the message that all of these bad things you're hearing about, that's not patients getting addicted to their medicine, that's the drug abusers getting their hands on these pills. And I knew that was wrong because I would ask every patient, how did you get addicted? And many of them became addicted through medical treatment. And so a group of docs, I was in addiction, some in pain, we all sort of we banded together because we recognized that the overprescribing was fueling this problem. And when we first put out a guidance document on calling for more cautious prescribing that was countering the messages, where we put in our document, opioids are addictive and that they don't work well when taken long term. And we tried to get our professional societies to help disseminate it, and we couldn't. And it wasn't so much that the professional societies were all getting funding from the pharmaceutical companies into their foundations. I don't think that was it. Our colleagues, when they looked at what we had written, after having it drilled into them for a decade that patients are suffering because opioids are underprescribed, they looked at what we were saying and they sort of recoiled. It was almost a taboo to say anything negative about opioids at that time. It has changed now, and most of the professional societies are really on the same page.
A great panel. Thanks so much for your comments. Just Stephen Peskin from Horizon and a general internist in practice at Rutgers Robert Johnson. So the thing about where we were as recently as 10, 15 years ago is pain was, and maybe you said earlier, was the fifth vital sign. The American Medical Association expunged that in 2016, but there was a very, very strong push that clinicians, whether she be a physician or he be a nurse practitioner, were really encouraged, promoted to address pain, and that we were undertreating pain. So we clearly went way, way, way beyond the pendulum the wrong way, and part of that was, again, biopharmaceutical-led marketing. But the pain as the fifth vital sign really ignited a lot of this. And we still should address pain. So, I mean, whether it's gabapentin for neuropathic pain or something else, pain's still an important thing to address. Phantom limb pain, whatever.
Eric Oplerud. Emergency departments are often a gateway into receiving pain medications. In Portland and in some other places, emergency departments have moved from prescribing opioids to trying to come up with something else. Is there any evidence that what we're doing is pushing more people over into the heroin and fentanyl market?
So that's a really good question. And you're hearing many people, and I think this was even in the Reason magazine article, this idea that the efforts to promote more cautious prescribing are driving people onto the black market. And if you look at the data for just overdose deaths, it would lead you to believe that, because if you look at the overdose death data, you'll see that deaths involving prescription opioids have leveled off, while since around 2013, deaths involving illicit opioids, heroin, and illicitly synthesized fentanyl have skyrocketed. And the fact that there's been a leveling off and a skyrocketing, you could assume that, it's being said the drug abusers have all switched from the pills to heroin, and that really isn't what's going on. What's been happening really from the beginning of the prescription opioid crisis is the younger people who became opioid addicted would switch to the black market. Older people who were opioid addicted didn't generally have to switch because they could get pills pretty easily from doctors. And we were seeing more deaths in the older people that were getting pills, more deaths in that group than in the people who were switching to heroin. Starting in 2013, the deaths in the heroin users starts to skyrocket because of fentanyl. So we really don't have evidence of a sudden shift to the black market. It's been a steady shift. It's just the reason the deaths are going up among black market opioid users is because the black market supply has never been as dangerous as it is right now.
I want to thank this great panel. Give them a round of applause. They are fantastic.